I think even the shilliest of the shill comic book industry supporters can admit at this point, things are not going well. Comic books are not indeed at an all-time high. In fact, they might be closer to an all-time low, or they certainly are at this point. Now, do I think Marvel and DC are going to go bankrupt anytime soon? No. They are part of enormous entertainment corporations, Warner Brothers, Discovery, and Disney. There's no way that they're going to go bankrupt. Do I think they're going to have to stop publishing comic books anytime soon? Probably not. It's cheap marketing for them. But if they don't pull their own weight and they don't perform a service in that marketing, they will become obsolete, and they'll probably go to reprints or something like that. And we'll probably never get the American comic book industry back. This might be the best that it could ever be if they don't do something soon to prove that they need to exist. Because right now, I think you and I could probably both agree that they probably don't need to exist. What's the last DC story that they could turn into a movie? Batman 3 Jokers. There's enough Batman and Joker stories out there that they probably don't need that one. What's the last Marvel story that could be turned into a movie? Apparently it was Null. We'll see how that one works out for Sony. But there's not a lot of modern stuff out there that really even justifies its own existence at this point, because the sales aren't good enough and the stories aren't good enough to lead into other media opportunities out there for the most part. And I'm going to talk about 5 things I think the comic book industry needs to do to survive starting today. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is the first thing that has to be done. If you don't do this first thing, you can't do the next 4. It's that important. It's the foundational element of all this. And now let's talk about what I think the comic book industry needs to do to survive. And I would definitely like to hear from you guys. What do you think Marvel and DC both need to do starting today if they want to be around in 20 years? Number 1, a leadership and editorial overhaul. This is the very first thing that must change at both companies. Jim Lee has proven he's a bit inept as a leader. He used to be a visionary. He is not that anymore. C.B. Cebulski has proven he does not have his eye on the prize for Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics have not really improved under his leadership, and he's been in charge long enough at this point. And that is only the tip of the iceberg. You need wholesale changes in leadership at both Marvel and DC to implement any kind of change that would actually fix something. Because I think at this point we realize Jim Lee and C.B. Cebulski are never going to admit they've made some massive mistakes. I think they're never going to admit that they've lost their audience. They're never going to admit they've cost more readers than they've actually gained during their tenures as the sole leadership of DC and Marvel Comics. This includes people like Tom Revort. This includes people like Marie Javins. But especially, you need editorial overhaul. Back in the day when comic books were good, the way that you became an editor on a SpiderMan franchise or an X-Men franchise or a Superman or a Batman is you actually had to be a writer yourself with some level of acclaim. You actually had to be able to tell a successful story yourself. We do not have that anymore. If comic books were being run like they were when they were successful, the Superman group editor would be Peter J. Tomasi. The Batman group editor would be Chuck Dixon. The X-Men group editor would be a Chris Claremont or a John Byrne or someone of that stature. The Spider-Man group editor would probably be a J.M. DeMatteis or somebody at that level, where they can't really keep up with the schedule. They write stories every once in a while, but for the most part, they're in charge of overseeing these enormous characters that are so important and all the stuff that's attached to them. We don't get that anymore. You get people straight out of college that they want to groom into these positions, and it has become a weird abomination of the system that should be in place. Very similar to pro wrestling. Do you remember when you were watching WWE and you're like, what happened? They can't tell stories anymore. There's nothing that makes any sense. None of these stories are really designed for wrestling fans anymore. And then what did you find out? Behind the scenes, Stephanie McMahon, because wrestling was too lowbrow and not Hollywood enough, went out there and hired a bunch of writers from Hollywood to come in and write wrestling storylines. And they got rid of all the bookers, the people that had wrestling knowledge and had years in the industry and knew how to work fans and how to get a live gate and how to build up to a big main event and all that stuff. And the stories were flat for years. That's basically what's happened at DC and Marvel these days. to where if you're a good writer, a Jeff Johns, and you pitch DC or want to pitch DC on a sequel to Batman 3 Jokers, they will not return your phone call because it wasn't their idea. The editors are coming up with the storylines that we're reading right now that are really terrible, and they're pitching them to the writers and hire them to write the stories that they've conceived themselves rather than being a part of the creative process. They are overall dictating it, and that is the most ludicrous, stupid system I have literally ever heard of in my life. Now, are there some, anomalies here and there where people come in and get to do their own thing? Yes, I imagine Mark Silvestri told the Batman Joker story. He wanted to, but that was a little mini-series. Far more often than not, you're getting stories like Alyssa Wong being cold called from a Marvel editor saying, hey, we want you to write Psylocke. We have this idea in mind for it. Like, I've never thought about Psylocke. Yeah, I do want to write that character because I would like a paycheck, rather than being like, you won't believe the most badass Psylocke story I have because she doesn't have one. And you don't need to have a story anymore. The editors and the editorial processes at Marvel and DC have become abominations under the current leadership, and you've got to wipe it all out. If you don't do that, none of the rest of this can ever happen. You can't get to step 2. Shit or get off the pot on floppy comic books. We've been writing for the trades for far too long at this point. We've been writing for the trades for what, 15 years? Thank you very much, Brian Michael Bendis. The floppy comic book has survived for 80 years for a reason. It's episodic storytelling. When you buy a single issue, you get basically a full story. You get a beginning, a middle, and an end. You get conflict resolution. You get something of importance actually happening within the comic book itself. That doesn't happen very often anymore. In fact, these days, when it does happen, my jaw is agape because I can't believe someone actually told a comic book story the right way. It's crazy what's going on. I just went through 3 years of Ram V Detective Comics. One story the entire time. One of the biggest wastes of my time in the history of my life. We've got 8 Deaths of Spider-Man coming up. That should not be in a periodic comic book format. It should be a fucking trade paperback. It should be a graphic novel because that's how you're writing the story. It's not a miniseries. Why is it being released in the episodic format? The same thing just happened with Tini Howard's Catwoman story. The 9 Lives of Catwoman played out in 10 fucking issues, almost a year's worth of storytelling to go literally nowhere. And it is so frustrating as a comic book reader when you get these kinds of stories and you can tell that they have no real place to go. They're just sitting there meandering, giving you filler every single month at $5 or $6 a clip. Comic books are too freaking expensive to tell stories this way. If you want to write a trade, if you want to write a graphic novel, go do that and release it as that. If you can't tell a full story with a satisfying conclusion in 24 pages, get the fuck out. And that doesn't mean you can't tell long-form storytelling. Go read Nightfall from Chuck Dixon and others. Guess what happens? Every issue, conflict resolution, a satisfying story. You felt like you got your money's worth. How long did Nightfall go? 3 fucking years? It's not exactly like this has never been done before. It's not exactly like this hasn't been perfected already. We are no longer writing for the trades at this point. When you do what Ram V just did or what Tom Taylor is currently doing in Nightwing that's about to wrap up, you are writing for the omnibus and you need to get the fuck out because I can't take it anymore. And these are the types of things that are driving readers away because you don't get your money's worth. There's no satisfaction into having 1/11 or 1/23 of an overall fucking story that has no conclusion or no satisfaction whatsoever in the issue. Shit or get off the pot. If you don't want to do floppies, don't do floppies. If you want to do trades of graphic novels, do that. But if you want to continue to release them in episodic format, you have to tell stories in an episodic way. I can't take it no more. Coming in at number 3, stop treating comics as collectibles. This has been going on for a very long time, and I understand we had the boom, in the late 80s, early 90s, when people realized, hey, I could send my kids to college, with a comic book that I bought when I was a kid, or I could buy a new house and all these types of things. And DC and Marvel like, well, there's only so much stuff that survived World War II. We need to create our own version of, limited quantity product out there. So we got the variant covers, and we've been getting variant covers for years, but they were never an enormous problem, or at least when they were an enormous problem, it got solved. And they became a problem, but it was a collector's problem. If you're a completionist, have fun with that. Go and find, all the rare variant covers that are out there. It has gotten so overwhelmingly stupid at this point. We've got 1 in 5,000 Chase variants out there that cost $5,000 the day of publication. They care so little about the interior comic book itself. They pay more, they being DC and Marvel, pay more for variant covers than they do for the entirety of the fucking story that's actually being produced. It's ridiculous at this point. It's gotten so ridiculous that Marvel are doing interior variants as collectibles at this point. What happens to collectibles in short order once they fall out of favor, or people realize that collectible isn't really the investment that you thought it could be? What happened to Pogs? What happened to Beanie Babies? Is the same thing that happens to everything else. Once people realize it's actually worthless, if you don't concentrate on what's happening between the cover page and the back cover page and make sure that the writing is high quality, that the art is high quality, you're only going to have speculators and completionists left. But nobody new is ever going to become a completionist if you don't have new stories for them to invest in. When's the last time you invested in an ongoing DC or Marvel story? Is it Green Lantern right now? That's the one I can think of right off the top of my head. Was it Moon Knight? Well, I'm sorry, they let you down there. These things rarely ever finish well these days. And you can tell Marvel and DC do not feel like they're in the publishing game anymore. They're not there to tell stories. They're no longer the House of Idea or the distinguished competition. They've become tops, fledgling collectible brands that absolutely suck if you actually want to read the comic books. It's a fucking miracle nowadays when you get a comic book that's like above a 4.5 out of 5 or 9 out of 10. It's crazy just the amount of lack of quality in comic books these days. The fourth thing that Marvel and DC need to do, incentivize the best creators to come to your company, and once they're there, to actually stay there for a while. We do not have the best comic book writers available to us writing the stories anymore. We basically don't have the best artists available to us doing the interiors anymore, because Marvel and DC have penny pinched and cut so many quarters and destroyed so many relationships with competent creators that they don't want to work with them anymore. How embarrassing was it that all within the space of, 15 days, DC lost their Batman writer, Marvel lost their Spider-Man writer, and their X-Men writer. 3 of the 4 biggest franchises in all of comic books, and your top writers left all of them within the space of a few weeks because Substack came along. Substack isn't even a publishing company. Substack comic books aren't even a thing anymore. Guess what hasn't happened? Nick Spencer's not back writing Spider-Man. James Tynion is not back at DC Comics. Jonathan Hickman obviously is at Marvel Comics these days, and he has an ongoing Ultimate Spider-Man. But a lot of the top talent refuse to come back and play ball with Marvel and DC because their royalties suck. There's no way to make long-term money. And guess what? If you do have a great idea, what happens if you create a character like Thanos, or you write a story like the Infinity Gauntlet that ends up generating is it $5 billion? I think it's close to $5 billion in box office in monies generated off the concept behind the Infinity Gauntlet. Now, certainly there are production costs, there's marketing costs in there, but I imagine they probably cleared at least $3.5 billion. What did Jim Starlin get for that? A $10,000 check and a plane ticket to see the premiere. That's not good enough. You made $3.5 billion cash. Not only that, you got all the shirts that you're selling, you're getting fucking theme park ride attractions and all that stuff based on the hard work, blood, sweat, and tears of these creators. You have to let them know, we're not going to forget about you. We're actually going to compensate you for the amazing fucking ideas that are the lifeblood of the entire industry that you're providing to us with characters that you don't own. Yes, we own the characters, but if you write the world's most badass Batman story or Spider-Man story, or you do something with a character like Hawkman or the Atom or a character like fucking Iron Man to really revitalize the character, you are going to get credit for that, not creator credit. You're going to get fucking money. We're going to back the truck up to you, and we're going to say thank you very much when you created something that will be able to sell long after you're freaking dead, and we're actually going to make a TV show about it, or a cartoon, or a video game, or a movie off of it. Or hell, we just might do all of that. And we're certainly going to make some backpacks and shirts and stuff like that. They are screwing creators out of their best ideas for far too long, and now the best creators will not give them to Marvel or DC anymore, and I do not blame them. They need to come to the table as honest brokers and say, hey, we want you and our company to write this character because we know that you love them. If you give us an amazing story, you're getting royalty on trade sales. If you give us a story that sells more than 80,000 copies, you're getting royalties on every issue that sold above a threshold that says that this is a hit. If the art that you came up for that story ends up on a t-shirt or in a video game or something like that, you are going to get some royalties on top of that. Without that, they're never going to come back. Yes, you'll have some outliers here and there. You'll have a Jonathan Hickman, stick around and do some work for Marvel. Maybe you have a Josh Williamson stick around if you want to consider him a superstar. But before long, they're all going to move along looking for a bigger payday that's going to build their legacy, not just with the fans, but also with their bank account. Marvel and DC can't keep acting like good creators don't deserve royalties. Stop screwing people over, stop being penny pinchers, and maybe you'll get a fucking classic story again. The final thing that Marvel and DC both need to do today, get back to canon and continuity. There are far too many liberties being taken with the canon, with the lore, with the timeline, with all the things that are happening with these characters. And the continuity is just abysmal these days. It's no fun to invest in the 616 or the Prime universe at DC anymore, because it doesn't matter what happens in one book. It won't even reflect in the other. You will see dead characters alive in another book. You'll see new costumes, and in the other book, it won't have them. You'll have conversations happen here, and they don't reflect over there. I will give this to From the Ashes at least. There's conversations happening in two different books that tied them together. At least there's a little bit of continuity, but of course we get no character continuity there. And that's a big problem that's going on here. These are the most popular superhero characters in the world. It's not because they're outdated. It's not because they were built for the wrong audience. These characters are timeless. We're talking Superman, Batman, X-Men, Spider-Man. We're talking about the creme de la creme, and every time you read them, one of these dumbass new writers wants to recontextualize the character or go back and change their origin or go back and add to their origin. Stop doing that. Adhere to the canon and the continuity. Understand there are going to be opportunities to go back there and fill some blanks and add some aspects into it if it's additive to the character, i.e., if we're talking about the Winter Soldier for Captain America. I would say that was additive to the Captain America lore, but you get something like, I don't know, Secret Empire. Was that additive? Going back and stating that Steve Rogers was always a Nazi? He was always a member of Hydra. He was just a deep, fake, undercover Captain America the whole time. Stop doing stuff to ruin the characters. Stop playing outside of continuity. If you want to do that, make it a what-if story, make it an Elseworlds, but you need to make the continuity in canon matter. If the things happening in Batman are important and the things happening in Superman are important, you could never lead up to that big-ass event that you want people to invest in. Everyone knows that they're bullshit at this point. You have to make the continuity matter. Every book, almost at Marvel Comics these days that's worth reading, is out of continuity. That's an enormous problem. Very few books at DC these days are worth reading and in continuity. Almost all their stuff is also out of continuity. There's nothing to invest in if the continuity doesn't exist. There's nothing to invest in if the canon doesn't matter. And the day that you start ignoring canon or you're taking continuity for granted is the day that you're telling everybody to walk the fuck away because you don't need to be invested in our product or our character or our universe anymore. And they have been telling people that at DC and Marvel for far too long. Now, obviously, I could go on and on. There are other things that they could change, but these are the 5 things that Marvel and DC need to do starting today if they want to survive and thrive and actually have a place in pop culture once again. Because we're talking about a niche of a niche of a niche these days. It's not a healthy industry right now. And I think even the most ardent shills of Marvel and DC have come to realize that Rome is burning and it's time to build that sumbitch back up on the foundation of good continuity, awesome canon, great creators creating great stories that are episodic in nature that make you need to come back the next month. Not because you got slow rolled and just had a fucking final cliffhanger and that's the only thing interesting that happened in there. And it all starts with a leadership change and an overhaul in the editorial processes at Marvel and DC, which are basically failing both companies right now. If you appreciate my perspective on this, being an honest broker in comic books, pointing out the obvious that needs to change today, and you would like to support me here at Think Critical YouTube, I do want to invite you to come visit me on Think Critical Patreon. There's a link in the video description. You go there, you find the right tier for you, and you see what benefits you get. There's lots of podcasts, extra videos, polls in there, all that kind of stuff, and there's an awesome community just waiting for you to discover. I hope to see you there very, very soon.